Hey everyone, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so we can uncover today's jaw-dropping story together. The camera was already rolling when William Riley Gaul walked into that hotel hallway, and that simple fact would later change everything. He didn't know it, he didn't sense it, he didn't even pause. To him, it was just another night, another plan, another moment he thought he could control. But somewhere above him, a small lens was quietly watching, capturing the final steps of a story that would later shock the entire country. This is one of those cases where the killer didn't realize he was being filmed, and that mistake would become the key to exposing a horrifying truth. Before his name became linked to murder, William Riley Gaul was just another man drifting through life, mostly unnoticed. He wasn't famous, he wasn't wealthy, he wasn't even particularly interesting on the surface. He lived in Ohio, moved from place to place, worked small jobs, and blended into the background of everyday life. People who knew him later said he was quiet, sometimes friendly, sometimes awkward, but never someone who stood out. He was the kind of person you would forget 5 minutes after meeting him. That's often how the most dangerous people hide. They don't look like monsters. They look like neighbors. William had a history of bouncing around. He struggled to keep stable work. He struggled to keep relationships. And over time, he developed a habit that would later become central to this story. He spent a lot of time in hotels. Cheap hotels, motels, extended stay places. These were places where people came and went, where nobody really asked questions, where cameras watched quietly, but no one paid attention to them. In early 2020, William ended up in a hotel in Springdale, Ohio. It was not a fancy place. It was the kind of hotel people stayed in when they didn't have many options. Some were traveling for work, some were between homes, some were running from something, and some, like William, were hiding something. One of the people staying in that same hotel was a woman named Rebecca Becky Auburn. Becky was 43 years old. She was a mother, she was a friend, and like many people in that hotel, she was going through a hard time in her life. She had struggled with addiction, and she was trying to survive in a world that had not been kind to her. But she was still a human being. She still mattered, and she still had people who loved her. William and Becky met in the hotel. To the outside world, it looked like just another random connection between two people living on the edge. They talked. They spent time together. They were seen walking in and out of each other's rooms. Nothing about it looked unusual. But behind closed doors, something much darker was slowly forming. On the night of March 13, 2020, Becky was seen entering William's hotel room. It would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Inside that room, something terrible happened. Investigators would later determine that Becky was brutally beaten and strangled. The attack was violent and personal. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of rage that went too far. This was a deliberate act. After Becky was dead, William didn't call for help. He didn't run. He didn't do what an innocent person would do. Instead, he started thinking about how to get away with it, and that's where the cameras came in. Hotels are full of cameras. They're in hallways, at entrances, near elevators, and sometimes even watching stairwells. Most people forget they're there. William was no different. As he began moving around the hotel after Becky was killed, he was being recorded the entire time. One of the most chilling pieces of footage shows William pushing a cart down the hallway. On that cart was a large, heavy object covered with a blanket. To anyone else, it might have looked like someone moving luggage, but police would later confirm that Becky's body was inside. William moved slowly, calmly, as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He believed no one was watching. He wheeled the cart out of the hotel, loaded it into his car, and drove away. For a brief moment, he probably thought he had done it. He probably thought he was free. But people were already starting to notice something was wrong. Becky didn't show up where she was supposed to. She didn't answer her phone. And people who knew her started asking questions. Hotel staff also noticed that she hadn't been seen since going into William's room. Soon, police were called. When officers arrived, they began doing what they always do in situations like this. They asked questions and they checked the cameras. That's when everything started to fall apart for William. The surveillance footage showed Becky entering William's room. It showed William leaving and coming back. And then it showed something that made detectives freeze. It showed him pushing that cart with a heavy, covered object out of the building. At that moment, this wasn't a missing person case anymore. This was a murder. Police tracked down William's car. Inside, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Becky's body was discovered not far away, dumped like trash. She had been beaten and strangled, and her life had been taken in the most cruel way. William was arrested and brought in for questioning. At first, he tried to deny everything. He claimed Becky had left on her own. He said he didn't know where she was. But the video didn't lie. The cameras had captured his movements, his actions, and his attempt to hide what he had done. As detectives showed him the footage, his story started to crack. He had no way out. Every step he took that night was recorded. Every lie he told could be proven wrong. This is one of the most powerful things about modern true crime cases. Technology doesn't forget. Cameras don't get tired. They don't blink. They don't feel sympathy. They just record. And William Riley Gaul had walked straight into their silent gaze. What makes this case even more disturbing is how ordinary it all looked. There was no dramatic chase, no loud argument in the hallway, no screams that brought people running. A woman went into a room. A man came out later with a cart. That was it. That's how easily a life was taken and nearly erased. But nearly is not the same as completely. In the days after his arrest, investigators worked to build the full story. They looked into William's past. They talked to people who knew him. And what they found painted a picture of a man who had been slipping deeper into darkness for years. William had a history of violence. He had a criminal record that included assault. This wasn't the first time he had hurt someone. It was just the first time he had killed someone and been caught on camera doing it. Becky's family was left to deal with a loss that no one should ever have to face. A woman who was trying to survive, who had her own struggles, but also her own hopes, was gone because she crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time, and all because a man thought no one was watching. This story isn't just about a murder. It's about how thin the line is between everyday life and absolute horror. It's about how a hallway, a hotel room, and a security camera can become the center of a nightmare. As the case moved forward, the footage became one of the strongest pieces of evidence against William. There was no arguing with it, no spinning it, no explaining it away. The truth was right there, frame by frame. In the next part of this story, we will go deeper into what happened inside that hotel room, how investigators pieced together the final moments of Becky's life, and how William Riley Gaul tried and failed to escape the consequences of what he had done. Because sometimes, the most dangerous mistake a killer can make is believing that no one is watching. Before anyone ever saw that chilling hallway footage, before the cart and the blanket and the slow, quiet walk toward the exit, there was a single closed door in that hotel where everything changed. Inside that small room, away from cameras and other people, Rebecca Becky Auburn faced the last moments of her life. And understanding what happened in there is what turns this from just another crime into something far more disturbing. When Becky walked into William Riley Gaul's room that night, nothing seemed unusual. They had been talking. They had been spending time together. To the people around them, it looked like two adults making a choice to be together. There was no sign of fear. No one saw her trying to get away. No one heard shouting. That's what makes what followed even harder to accept. Inside the room, investigators later believed that the situation changed fast. There were signs of a struggle. Furniture was out of place. Items were broken. Blood was found in several spots. Becky did not go quietly. She fought for her life. The medical examiner would later explain that Becky died from a combination of blunt force trauma and strangulation. That means she was beaten and choked. This was not a quick or painless death. It was violent, it was terrifying, and it was up close and personal. William had to look at her as he did it. This kind of killing tells you a lot about the person who did it. Strangulation, especially, is one of the most intimate and brutal ways to kill someone. It takes time, it takes pressure, and it takes a willingness to keep going even while the victim struggles to breathe. William didn't just want Becky gone. He wanted control over her in those final moments. At some point, Becky stopped moving. She stopped breathing, and the room went quiet. That's when William had a choice. He could have called for help. He could have run out screaming that something went wrong. He could have done anything that an innocent or even a panicked person might do. But instead, he chose something else. He chose to cover it up. William began cleaning. He tried to wipe down surfaces. He tried to remove blood. He tried to make it look like nothing had happened. But no matter how much you clean, you can't erase violence. Small drops were still there. Smears were still there. The truth was still there, waiting to be found. Then he had to deal with the biggest problem of all, Becky's body. She was not small. Moving a human body is not easy, especially when you are alone. William needed a plan, and he needed to do it in a way that wouldn't attract attention. That's when he found the hotel luggage cart. Those carts are meant to carry suitcases. They're big, they're strong, and they're something people see every day in a hotel. Using one wouldn't look strange. William wrapped Becky's body in a blanket. This wasn't done out of care. It was done to hide what was underneath. Then he placed her on the cart and covered her up. To anyone walking by, it might have looked like someone moving laundry or belongings, but underneath that blanket was a dead woman. As he pushed that cart down the hallway, William was walking through one of the most watched places in the building. Cameras lined the walls. They watched every door, every corner, every exit, and yet he walked calmly, as if nothing was wrong. This is one of the most haunting parts of this case. A man who had just taken a life was moving through a public space like he was on a normal errand. No shaking, no panic, no rush, just quiet steps and slow wheels rolling across the carpet. Outside, he loaded Becky into his car. That alone would have been difficult. He was not a strong man, but adrenaline and fear can push people to do things they normally couldn't. He managed to get her inside, close the trunk, and drive away. Where he went next would seal his fate. William drove to a wooded area not far from the hotel. It was dark. It was quiet, and he believed no one would ever look there. He left Becky's body on the ground and drove away, leaving her alone in the cold. Back at the hotel, time was running out. Hotel staff started to notice that Becky hadn't been seen since going into William's room. She didn't check out. She didn't come down to the lobby. Her phone wasn't answering. And when they tried to get into the room, something felt off. Police were called. When officers arrived, they went through the hotel's records. They saw Becky's name. They saw William's name. And they saw that the two had been together that night. That alone didn't prove anything, but it was enough to start looking closer. Then they went to the cameras. This is where William's entire plan collapsed. Every hallway, every door, every movement. It was all there. Becky walking in, William coming out, William coming back, and finally, William pushing that cart with the covered shape. To trained investigators, that footage screamed one thing, a body. They didn't even need to go far to confirm it. When they searched William's room, they found blood. They found signs of a struggle. They found evidence that someone had died there. Now they just needed to find Becky. Using phone records, traffic cameras, and William's own movements, police tracked where he had gone after leaving the hotel. It didn't take long before they found Becky's body in that wooded area. Seeing her like that was heartbreaking. She had been treated like something that could just be thrown away, but the investigators didn't see trash. They saw a victim. They saw a woman who deserved justice. William was arrested not long after. When he sat in the interview room, he still tried to play innocent. He claimed Becky had left on her own. He said they had argued, but nothing more. He even suggested that maybe someone else had hurt her. but the truth was sitting on a hard drive in the police station. Every lie he told could be matched against video that showed exactly where he was and what he did. As detectives laid out the timeline piece by piece, William had nowhere to hide. The cameras had caught him at the worst moment of his life, not when he was angry, not when he was drunk, but when he was trying to get away with murder. And that's what makes this case so chilling. He didn't get caught because he made noise. He didn't get caught because someone walked in. He got caught because he forgot that the world was watching. By the time William Riley Gaul was led into the police interview room, the story was already written. The cameras had captured him. The hotel room told its own story. Becky's body had been found. But none of that mattered yet, because now it was time to see if William would admit what he had done or try to lie his way out of it. And like so many people before him, he believed he was smarter than everyone else in that room. He sat there looking small and tired, wearing the same clothes he had been arrested in. His hands were folded in front of him. His eyes kept shifting toward the door. He knew he was in trouble, but he didn't know just how deep that trouble was. At that point, he had no idea how much evidence the police already had. Detectives started calmly. They didn't accuse him right away. They talked to him like a friend. They asked him about his life, where he grew up, where he had been living, how he ended up at that hotel. William answered in short, careful sentences. He tried to sound normal. He tried to sound relaxed, but his voice kept cracking, and his hands wouldn't stop moving. Eventually, they brought up Becky. William said he had met her at the hotel. He said they hung out. He said they talked, and maybe even argued a little. But he claimed she left his room alive. According to him, she walked out, and that was the last time he ever saw her. The detectives let him talk. They let him build his story. This is a classic police tactic. The more someone talks, the more chances they have to mess up. William said Becky was upset. He said she was acting strange. He suggested maybe she had gone to meet someone else. He even hinted that maybe she had gotten into trouble after leaving his room. He was planting the idea that whatever happened to her wasn't his fault. But then the detectives changed their tone. They slid a photo across the table. It was a still image from the hotel surveillance camera. It showed William pushing the luggage cart down the hallway with the large covered object on it. William froze. He stared at the picture for a long moment. You could almost see his mind racing, trying to find a way out. The problem was, there was no way out. That image didn't lie. The detectives asked him one simple question. What's on the cart? William tried to answer, but no words came out. He swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to the table. Finally, he said it was just some of his stuff. Some belongings he was moving. They didn't argue. They just showed him another image. This one was clearer. You could see the shape under the blanket. You could see it was too large, too heavy, too human to be luggage. William's story started to fall apart. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to admit things. He said Becky had been in his room. He said they had argued. He said things got out of hand. He said he didn't mean for it to happen. This is something you hear again and again in murder cases. I didn't mean to. As if intent somehow changes the outcome. William finally admitted that Becky had died in his room. He admitted that he had moved her body. He admitted that he had taken her away from the hotel. But even then, he tried to soften what he had done. He didn't describe the violence. He didn't talk about the beating or the strangulation. He made it sound like something that just happened, like an accident. But the medical evidence would later prove that was a lie. As the interrogation continued, William's mask kept slipping. He went from calm to defensive to sad and back again. He asked what was going to happen to him. He asked if there was any way to make it better. He even cried at one point, though it was hard to tell if those tears were for Becky or for himself. What he never did was truly take responsibility. He talked about stress. He talked about drugs. He talked about how his life had been hard. He talked about everything except the fact that he had taken someone else's life. Outside that room, Becky's family was living a nightmare. They were getting phone calls from police. They were being told things no one should ever have to hear. Their daughter, their sister, their loved one was gone, and the person responsible was sitting a few miles away trying to explain it all away. As the case moved forward, prosecutors began building the charges. This wasn't just a simple murder case. This was a brutal killing, followed by an attempt to hide the body. It showed planning, not just rage. It showed that William knew exactly what he had done and tried to get away with it. When the charges were announced, they were severe: murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse. Each one carried serious prison time. Together, they meant William would likely never walk free again. But for many people watching this case, the most shocking part wasn't just what William did, it was how close he came to getting away with it. If that hotel hadn't had cameras, if that footage had been erased, if someone hadn't noticed Becky was missing, this could have been another cold case, another name lost in a file. Instead, a small camera in a quiet hallway caught the truth. When William Riley Gaul was brought into the courtroom for the first time, the room felt heavy. This wasn't like the police interview room, where he could slouch in a chair and try to control the story. This was a place where the truth had a voice, where Becky's family was sitting just a few feet away, and where everything he had done was about to be spoken out loud. For Becky's loved ones, this was the first time they had been in the same room as the man who killed her. There is no way to describe what that feels like. You know this person took someone you loved. You know they changed your life forever. And now you're expected to sit quietly while lawyers talk about evidence and procedures. It's a pain that doesn't go away. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out what happened in simple, clear words. Becky went into William's hotel room. She never came out alive. William beat her. He strangled her. He wrapped her body in a blanket, put her on a luggage cart, and tried to throw her away like she didn't matter. And then they showed the video. When that footage played in court, you could hear a pin drop. The screen showed William pushing the cart down the hallway, looking calm, almost bored. It didn't look like a man who had just committed a terrible crime. It looked like someone running an errand. And that's what made it so disturbing. For Becky's family, it was unbearable. They weren't just hearing about what happened, they were seeing the moment their loved one was being carried away. William sat there staring at the table. His defense tried to argue that this was not a planned murder. They said it was a fight that got out of control. They talked about drugs, stress, and poor decisions. They tried to make William look like a broken man who made a terrible mistake. But the prosecution brought in the medical examiner. The doctor explained that Becky had injuries all over her body, bruises, broken bones, marks on her neck. These were not the signs of a simple accident. These were the signs of a violent attack. Someone had hurt her again and again before she died. Strangulation, the doctor explained, takes time. It's not something that happens in a second. The person doing it has to keep squeezing even while the victim struggles, even while their body tries to breathe, even while they are dying. That meant William had plenty of time to stop. He didn't. The prosecution also showed how William tried to clean the room. They showed the blood. They showed the damaged furniture. They showed how he used the luggage cart and his car to move the body. All of this pointed to one thing. He knew what he did was wrong, and he tried to hide it. That's what destroyed any argument that this was just a mistake. As the trial went on, more details came out about William's past. He had a history of violence. He had hurt people before. This wasn't some peaceful man who suddenly snapped. This was someone who had crossed lines long before Becky ever met him. When it was time for Becky's family to speak, the courtroom changed. This was no longer about legal words and evidence. This was about loss. Her family talked about who Becky really was, not just a woman in a hotel room, not just a victim in a crime story, but a daughter, a sister, a person who laughed, who loved, who mattered. They talked about her struggles, yes, but also her kindness. They talked about the hole her death had left in their lives. William sat there listening, or at least that's what it looked like. In moments like that, people want to see remorse. They want to see a killer understand the pain they caused. But William's face stayed mostly blank. It was hard to tell what he was thinking, if he was thinking at all. When the jury finally went out to decide his fate, it didn't take long. The evidence was too strong. The video was too clear. The truth was too loud. William Riley Gaul was found guilty. He was later sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. No chance of walking free. No second chance. The man who thought no one was watching would now spend every day being watched by guards and cameras behind bars. For Becky's family, it wasn't justice. Nothing can ever truly be justice when someone you love is gone forever. But it was something. It was the knowledge that the man who took her life would never hurt anyone else. Still, the case left people with a chilling question. How many times does this happen when there are no cameras? How many people disappear into silence because no one was there to see? To really understand this case, you have to look past the courtroom and the headlines and look at William Riley Gaul as a person, not to excuse what he did, but to understand how someone who seemed so ordinary could end up committing something so horrific. Because in almost every true crime story, the warning signs are there. They're just easier to see after it's too late. William did not grow up with fame, money, or stability. His life was messy from the start. He bounced between places. He struggled with relationships. He had a hard time keeping work. People who knew him described him as moody, unpredictable, and often angry. He could be friendly one moment and cold the next. That kind of personality can be hard to live with, and over time, it pushed people away. He also had a history with drugs. And while drugs don't turn someone into a killer, they can make a bad situation worse. They lower control. They increase aggression. They make already troubled people even more unstable. For William, drugs were not an escape. They were fuel on a fire that was already burning. There were also signs of violence in his past. Before Becky ever met him, William had been in trouble for hurting others. These weren't just small arguments. These were serious situations where he crossed lines. But like many people in the system, he kept getting chances. He kept being allowed back into the world. And that world eventually crossed paths with Becky. Becky was vulnerable. She was staying in a hotel. She was struggling. People like William often look for people like Becky, not because they care about them, but because they see them as easy to control. Someone with fewer resources. Someone with fewer people watching out for them. That power imbalance is dangerous. When Becky and William started spending time together, it may have felt normal at first. Two lonely people finding company. But behind William's quiet smile was a need for control. And when something didn't go his way that night in the hotel room, that need turned into violence. What's especially disturbing about this case is how calculated William became after the murder. He didn't fall apart. He didn't collapse in panic. He started thinking. He cleaned. He planned. He moved the body. That tells us something important. This was not just a moment of blind rage. This was someone trying to protect himself, even after taking a life. And yet, even with all that planning, he made one fatal mistake. He forgot the cameras. Hotels are designed to watch people, not because they expect murder, but because they want to prevent theft, damage, and trouble. Those cameras, meant for safety, became the silent witness to Becky's final journey. William never thought to look up. When you watch the footage, what stands out most is how normal it all looks. A man pushing a cart, walking down a hallway, no chaos, no rush, just quiet steps. That's what makes it so haunting. Evil doesn't always look wild and loud. Sometimes it looks calm. After his arrest, people who had known William started to come forward. Some said they were not surprised. They talked about his anger, his mood swings, his tendency to blame others for his problems. They talked about how he could be cruel and manipulative. Looking back, it all fits. The isolation, the violence, the need for control, the lack of real empathy. These are the things that, when combined, can lead to something terrible. But what about Becky? It's important to remember her as more than just a victim. She was not defined by the hotel she stayed in or the struggles she faced. She was a person with a story. She had people who loved her. She had dreams, even if they were hard to reach. Her life had value, and it was taken by someone who thought he could get away with it. Cases like this force us to face an uncomfortable truth. There are people walking among us who are deeply broken. They don't wear signs. They don't announce themselves. They look like anyone else. And sometimes they end up in the same places as people who are already hurting. That's where tragedy happens. Long after the trial was over and William Riley Gaul was locked behind prison walls, the case refused to fade away. For the people who worked it, for Becky's family, and for everyone who saw that video, the story stayed alive in a way most cases do not. Because when a crime is caught on camera, it doesn't just live in reports and memories. It lives in images you can never unsee. Detectives who handled the case later said the footage was one of the hardest things they had to watch. Not because it was graphic, but because it was so quiet. There was no screaming, no chaos, just a man calmly pushing a cart with a woman's body inside it. That silence made it worse. It showed how cold and empty the act really was. For Becky's family, the pain didn't end with the verdict. Grief doesn't work on a schedule. Even after justice was served, they had to wake up every day knowing she was gone. They had to live with the knowledge of how she died. That kind of loss changes people forever. Some of them spoke later about how hard it was to know that Becky's final moments were filled with fear and violence. They wished they could go back in time, even for a minute, to pull her out of that room, to tell her not to go, to save her. But time doesn't move backward. What this case also did was make people look at hotel safety in a different way. Staff members who worked in places like the one Becky stayed at began paying more attention. They learned how important it was to notice when someone went missing, how important it was to check the cameras. That awareness, in some small way, came from Becky's story. The video of William pushing the cart became one of the most shared and discussed pieces of true crime footage online. People were shocked by how normal he looked. They couldn't understand how someone could do something so terrible and then just walk away like it was nothing. But for experts in crime and behavior, it made perfect sense. Many killers don't look like monsters. They look like people. That's what makes them so dangerous. William, now sitting in a prison cell, will never again walk freely in a hotel hallway. He will never push another cart. He will never be able to pretend that night didn't happen. But even behind bars, the weight of what he did follows him. Some inmates know who he is. Some guards know his story. And that can be its own kind of punishment. For Becky's loved ones, the world kept moving, even though theirs felt like it had stopped. Birthdays came and went, holidays passed, and there was always an empty space where she should have been. They did their best to keep her memory alive. They talked about her. They shared photos. They reminded people that she was more than just a headline. And in a strange way, the cameras that caught her final moments also made sure she would never be forgotten. This case stands as a reminder of how fragile life can be and how quickly everything can change. One decision, one door, one person trusting the wrong someone, and everything is over. Stories like the one about William Riley Gaul and Becky Auburn don't just stay inside courtrooms. They move out into the world. They show up on news channels, on social media, in documentaries, and in late-night conversations between people who can't stop thinking about what they just heard. There's something about cases like this that pulls people in and refuses to let go. Part of it is the footage. Seeing a crime unfold, even in pieces, changes how people feel about it. When you read about a murder, it can feel distant. When you see a man pushing a cart with a body inside, it becomes real in a way words alone can't match. It feels like you're standing in that hallway, watching him walk past. That's why this case hit so many people so hard. But there's another reason too. Becky's story touched something deeper. She was not a celebrity. She wasn't rich or powerful. She was just a woman trying to get through life, and that made her easy to relate to. People saw themselves, their friends, or their loved ones in her. When something terrible happens to someone ordinary, it sends a message that it could happen to anyone. In the true crime world, this case became a powerful example of how technology is changing justice. In the past, a crime like this might have been much harder to solve. No witnesses, no noise, no one seeing Becky leave. William might have walked away and never been caught, but the cameras didn't miss a thing. They showed when Becky went in. They showed when William came out. They showed the cart. They showed the exit. They told a story that no lawyer could twist and no killer could escape. That's both comforting and scary. Comforting because it means criminals are more likely to be caught. Scary because it means we are all being watched all the time. For some people, that footage became a reminder to be more careful, to think twice about who they trust, to be aware of their surroundings. It's sad that it takes something so horrible to make people more cautious, but that's how it often works. William's name became tied forever to that hallway and that cart. No matter what he does now, that is how the world will remember him. Not as a man with a past, but as the man who didn't realize he was being filmed while he tried to get rid of a body. And Becky became more than a victim. She became a symbol of how easily someone can be lost, and how important it is to speak for those who no longer can. True crime fans often talk about closure. They want to see the bad guy caught. They want to see justice served. In this case, they got that. But closure doesn't mean happiness. It just means the story has an ending. And some endings still hurt. In the next part, we will take a final look at the evidence that sealed William's fate, the small details that mattered most, and how a single camera turned a nearly invisible crime into something the world could never ignore. By the time the case against William Riley Gaul reached its final stage, there was no mystery left about what had happened. But what surprised many people was how small, almost ordinary, the pieces of evidence were that ended up destroying his entire story. Not some dramatic confession, not a heroic witness, but small, quiet details that, when put together, became impossible to deny. The first and most powerful piece was that hotel camera. That single camera in the hallway didn't just show a man pushing a cart. It showed timing. It showed direction. It showed behavior. It showed that Becky went into William's room and never walked out. And it showed that William walked out with something large and covered. That alone was enough to make investigators look deeper. Then there was the room itself. The blood stains that William couldn't completely clean. The signs of a struggle. The damage to the furniture. All of it told a story of violence, even without a single word being spoken. And then there was Becky's body, the injuries on her neck, the bruises on her face and arms, the marks that showed she fought back. These were not the marks of an accident. They were the marks of someone being attacked. Each piece by itself might not have been enough, but together they formed a picture so clear that even William could not escape it. What's frightening is how close he came to getting away with it. If that hotel had not had working cameras, if no one had noticed Becky was missing, if the footage had been erased or lost, this case might have gone cold. Becky might have become just another name on a long list of unsolved disappearances. Instead, she became a reminder of how much truth can be hidden in small details. When people talk about this case now, they often focus on that one image, William pushing the cart. It has become a symbol of the entire story, a man trying to quietly erase what he had done, not knowing that his every move was being recorded. It's haunting because it feels so close to everyday life. We've all walked down hotel hallways. We've all seen those carts. We've all passed by people we didn't notice. And that makes you wonder how many stories are happening right next to us that we never see. For Becky's family, those details became something else. They became proof. Proof that her life mattered. Proof that what happened to her was real. Proof that the man who hurt her could not hide. William will spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. His days now are slow and controlled. Doors open and close when someone else decides. Cameras watch him now, just like they did that night. The difference is, this time, he knows. But Becky will never get another day. Her story lives on in that footage, in the courtroom records, and in the hearts of the people who loved her. And every time someone watches that hallway video, it's not just about a killer being caught. It's about a woman who deserved to live. When you step back and look at everything that happened in the William Riley Gaul case, one thing becomes painfully clear. This was not just a story about a killer being caught. It was a story about trust, about how easily people can walk into danger without knowing it, and about how the smallest things can reveal the biggest truths. Becky trusted William enough to walk into his room. That one decision, made in what probably felt like an ordinary moment, changed everything. Most of us make small choices like that every day. We meet people, we talk, we share space, we assume we are safe. And most of the time, we are. But this case shows how fragile that safety can be. William took advantage of that trust. He didn't look like a threat. He didn't act like a monster. He was just another man in a hotel hallway. That's what makes this story so unsettling. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. After Becky was gone, William believed he had erased her. He cleaned. He moved her body. He drove away. In his mind, he had wiped the slate clean. But the truth doesn't disappear just because someone wants it to. It waits. The camera waited. It watched quietly as he pushed that cart. It watched as he left the building. It watched as he tried to move on. And when the time came, it spoke louder than any witness ever could. That's a powerful lesson. In a world full of cameras, so much is recorded. We don't always think about it. We don't always notice. But those silent eyes are always there, ready to tell a story when someone tries to hide. For Becky's family, that story was painful, but it was also important. It meant they didn't have to wonder forever. It meant they didn't have to live with endless questions. They knew what happened. They knew who did it. And they knew he would never be free to hurt anyone else. Still, no amount of justice can fill the space Becky left behind. People who loved her still think about what she would be doing now, where she might have been, who she might have become. Those thoughts never stop. They just grow quieter over time. This case also made many people look at true crime differently. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a reminder that behind every story is a real person, a real family, real pain. Watching that hallway footage is not just watching a criminal being caught. It's watching a human life being carried away, and that's something you never forget. Even after the news moved on and new stories took over the headlines, Becky Auburn's story did not disappear. For her family, for the people who worked her case, and for many who followed it, her name stayed alive. And in true crime, that matters more than most people realize. So often, the focus is on the killer, his face, his name, his past, his punishment. But Becky was the one who lost everything. She was the one whose future was taken. And the way this case was recorded, almost frame by frame, made it impossible to forget that. People who saw the footage didn't just see William pushing a cart. They saw the weight of what was inside. They saw the final journey of someone who should have been walking on her own 2 feet. That image became a quiet memorial in its own strange way. Becky's loved ones made sure the world knew who she was beyond that moment. They talked about her kindness, her sense of humor, her struggles, and her strength. They refused to let her be reduced to just another true crime victim. In doing that, they gave her back a piece of what was taken. For many viewers, Becky's story became a wake-up call. It reminded people to check on those who might be alone, to pay attention when someone goes missing, to understand that everyone, no matter their situation in life, deserves care and safety. This case also showed how important it is to speak up. Hotel staff noticed Becky was gone. They didn't ignore it. They made the call. That one decision helped bring the truth to light. If they had brushed it off, things might have ended very differently. In a way, Becky was not alone in the end. The cameras saw her. The investigators followed her trail, and the world listened when her story was told. William Riley Gaul will spend the rest of his life in a cell, remembered not for who he was, but for what he did. Becky, however, is remembered for who she was, and for the lesson her story teaches, that every life matters, and every truth deserves to be known. When you look back at everything that happened, the story of William Riley Gaul and Becky Auburn feels like something that shouldn't be real. It feels like a movie. A man, a hotel, a hidden camera, and a crime caught in the quietest way possible. But this was not fiction. This was a real woman who lost her life, and a real man who believed he could make that life disappear. What makes this case stay with people is not just the violence, it's the stillness of it all. There were no dramatic alarms, no chase through the streets, no moment where someone burst in to save Becky. It all happened behind a closed door, and for a short time, it seemed like it might stay there. But the truth doesn't like to stay hidden. It waits in small details, in a stain on a carpet, in a timestamp on a screen, in a grainy piece of video from a hallway camera that never blinked. That camera did what people could not. It remembered. William forgot something very important that night. He forgot that the world was watching, even when it felt empty. He forgot that every step he took left a mark, and in trying to erase Becky, he ended up writing his own ending. Becky Auburn should be remembered, not for how she died, but for the simple fact that she lived. She was a person who deserved another day, another chance, another tomorrow. Her life mattered, even when she was struggling, even when she was in a place most people pass without noticing. This case is a reminder that danger does not always look dangerous. It can sit beside you. It can talk to you. It can feel normal right up until the moment it isn't. It also reminds us that sometimes justice comes from the quietest places: a camera in a hallway, a worker who notices someone is missing, a family that refuses to give up. These are the things that turned a nearly invisible crime into one the world could not ignore. William Riley Gaul thought he was alone when he pushed that cart down the hallway, but he wasn't. And because he wasn't, Becky's story did not end in silence. It ended with the truth.